So let's start with the deep causes. My argument is that the West is principally responsible for this mess, not the Russians. This, of course, is not the conventional wisdom in the United States. And in fact, except for Steve Cohen, who's now at now at NYU, he used to be at Princeton, Henry Kissinger, and maybe a handful of other people, there are not many people who agree with me. But I think the facts are quite clear on this, that the West is responsible. And my aim is that the main deep causes, the aim of the United States and its European allies, to peel Ukraine away from Russia's orbit and incorporate it into the West.
You have talked a lot about security guarantees, and now we've seen your proposals. You also say you have no intention of invading Ukraine. So will you guarantee unconditionally that you will not invade Ukraine or any other sovereign country? Or does that depend on how negotiations go?
Speaking of the security guarantees and what it will depend upon, or if something will depend upon the negotiations, our actions will not depend on the negotiation. They will depend on the unconditional compliance with the Russian security demands today and in the historical context. In this sense, we have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable. There is nothing unclear about this. We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house. So, are we demanding something excessive? We're simply asking them not to deploy their attack systems over at our home. What is so unusual or peculiar about that?
We've only been underway for just a few hours, and we're already being followed by 2 Russian Navy vessels, which are about 3 miles off the starboard side.
Our basic goal has been to make Ukraine a Western bulwark on Russia's border. And Russia says, this ain't happening, period, end of story. And we will do everything we can to make sure it does not happen.
NATO expansion is not over for the Russians. It's a reality. NATO's sitting on its borders. It's not about future NATO expansion. It's about current. NATO expansion represents the following to Russia. And near this I will end. It represents a profoundly broken promise to Russia made by the first Bush that in return for united Germany and NATO, NATO would not expand eastward. This is beyond any dispute. People say, well, they never signed a treaty. But a deal is a deal. The United States gives its word unless we're shysters. And if you don't get it in writing, we'll cheat you. We broke our word. And when both Putin and Medvedev say publicly to Madeleine Albright and others, we, Russia, feel deceived and betrayed, that's what they're talking about.
I was speaking about very obvious things. How can you not understand that? You say you will not expand, and then you keep expanding. You say we will have equal guarantees for everyone on the number of international agreements, and then we see there is no equality or no equal security.
But there's something even more profound that's a taboo in the United States. NATO expansion represents, for the Russians, American hypocrisy and a dual standard. And they see it this way, and I can't think of any way to deny their argument. The expansion of NATO is the expansion of the American sphere of influence. Plain and simple. Where NATO goes, our military force goes. Where NATO goes, our arms munitions go because they have to buy American weapons. Where NATO goes, Western soldiers go who date their women. They bring along their habits and all the other things. It's clearly, undebatably, indisputably, an expansion of America's sphere of influence. So there has been a tremendous expansion of America's sphere of influence since the mid-1990s, right plunk on Russia's borders. All the while, every administration, American administration, saying to Russia, including the Obama administration, you cannot have a sphere of influence because that's old thinking. Well, I mean, the Russians may be cruel, but they're not stupid. In other words, what they say is we can now have the biggest sphere of influence the world's ever seen, and you don't get any, not even on your own border. In fact, we're taking what used to be your traditional sphere of influence, along with the energy and all the rest. It's ours now. Again, this idea of a winner-take-all policy. This is the enormous resentment in Russia. The relationship will never become a stable cooperative relationship until we deal with this problem.
It's a costless step for the American side and potentially for NATO would simply be to express the view that NATO's expansion, which has encompassed the Baltic states, Romania, Hungary, Poland, is over. That kind of statement could provide some pressure release at this point, and it should be emphasized, costs NATO and costs America nothing.
Back in 1918, one of the assistants of Woodrow Wilson, the US president, said that the whole world would feel calmer and safer if today's enormous Russia would be replaced with the states of Siberia and 4 more states in the European part of Russia. That was said in 1918, and in 1991 we separated into 12 separate parts. It seems to me that our partners were not satisfied with that. They think that Russia is a tad too large. Even the European countries have turned themselves into a union of states. They are quite small states with populations of 60 to 80 million people, but even after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we only had 146 million people, and that is too much for the West.
Does it mean Russia's entitled to a sphere of influence? I don't want to speak for Jack Matlock, but Jack thinks yes, depending on what you mean by sphere of influence. They can't occupy countries. We had a Monroe Doctrine. I don't know what that meant. But the point is that until this is worked out, the relationship will never truly be post-Cold War.